If you know these words, would you please pray along with me? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not mine, be done. Please be seated. So what I want to talk to you today about is, what do you do whenever your barns get filled? Now we have a lot of things in life where we have abundance, right? So we mentioned some of them earlier. So some of you are abundant in learning. Others of you are abundant in food. Some of you are abundant in goods. Some of you are abundant in time. Some of you are abundant in, whatever it is not capturable to us anymore. And we feel this need that we have to have something more to contain it in. And so times we get into this kind of thinking that, what do I need to do differently? How can I hold on to these things? When should I do this? Why should I do this? How should I do this? And it goes on and on. And it's one of the facts of life. Now, you'll hear me talk a lot here at St. Brendan's about the abundance God has been blessing us with. And this is a good thing. And so you'll hear a common theme, which is we have to have new nets for new abundance, because we base it on that scripture passage that whenever Peter listened to Jesus and threw his nets on the other side of the boat, the nets were not strong enough to hold all of the abundance. So you'll hear me talk a lot about making sure we have new nets. Today, though, I want to talk about the downside of abundance. See, there can be a downside, and that's what I think that the scripture's about today. One of my friends, his name is Bill, who's in a 12-step program. He told me that he has a situation where his sponsor once said to him, Bill, the problem with you is you always want a little more of what you already have. A little more. There's an unquenchableness about us. It kind of reminds me of these two guys who were friends, and they didn't see each other for about a month. So they got together, and one of the guys looked at his buddy, and he was thinking, boy, you don't look so happy. What's been going on? He said, well, 3 weeks ago, my uncle died. And he said, oh, I'm so sad. But there was good news to it. He left me $55,000. And he said, and 2 weeks ago, my cousin died, and he passed on to me $95,000 that was tax-free. And a week ago, my grandfather died, and he left me $1 million. And his friend looked at him and said, and so why so glum? He said, because this week, nothing yet. You see, we get to that place, right, that there's like this unquenchableness that goes on with us. And that's what we have to watch. There's a principle in Taoism, that teaches he or she is rich who knows when he or she has enough. What is enough? See? Do any of you remember Pac-Man? Do you remember our first Game Boy, the toy before Game Boy? Pac-Man would eat. There was another game back out at that time that some of you may be familiar with. It was called Bubbles. Do you remember Bubbles by any chance? You remember good. It was this, the game board was a sink. Okay, so it was a sink with this drain. And the object was that you would increase the size of your bubble if you ate up all these different crumbs that were in the sink. So what you do is you kind of like maneuver yourself around, and these crumbs would add to you and you'd get bigger. But you had some enemies, some dangers. So the dangers were the brushes, so you had to avoid the brushes. The sponges were dangers, and so also razor blades. So you had to watch for those. Now the good news was that if you got a score of 250 or more, that all of a sudden you're now really, really big, but a tarantula comes out of the drain. All right, so you have another enemy. And then you hit 50 more points and another tarantula. And so you know that the bigger you get and the sink doesn't get any bigger, you're going to be had, And so it is whenever we get overly built and we have no place to put the extra stuff, and we have limited capacity. So there's pitfalls that come with abundance, And so what do you do with the extra goods that your garden produces when your barn is so small? So doesn't it in a way make some sense? Build a newer barn, right? So it does make sense. But the little boy said there, bigger pockets. In a sense, that does make sense, doesn't it, whenever you think about that? But there's something that we're missing with this. So, like for example, when do you have to stop accumulating? I heard about people saying, Brendan, some of you who are new might not know this, but yesterday, 1 year ago, we would have been spending a lot of time doing something. Does anyone know what yesterday would have been? The yard sale, okay? Our yard sale. This is the first year that we didn't have it. But I heard that someone at a yard sale bought a bottle that was corked and uncorked the bottle, and a genie came out of it. And the genie said, any wish you want, and as many as you want. And so the guy says, well, how about $1 billion in a Swiss bank account? Poof! All of a sudden, a paper floated down with an account on it with his name and $1 billion and the numbers. And he said, well, this is kind of cool. And he said, can I do another one? And the genie said, of course. He says, well, how about a red Ferrari? Poof! There he was, keys and in the car. And so he says, can I press it? And he says, how about making me irresistible to women? Poof! He became a box of chocolates. See, you have to figure out and find out, when is it enough? See, when is the abundance, just don't accumulate anymore. We raised 2 nephews and a niece. One of them, God love him, he passed away. He had a problem with eating. And so I remember one day we went to a pizza place. And so we all had like 3 slices of pizza. And the peculiarity of this pizza place was you had unlimited toppings. So you had this whole bin of black olives and this whole bin of sausage and pepperoni and everything. So I went over and I did my thing, and Ken did his thing, and then my nephew Kenny went over and did his thing, which was piled on these tons of olives, and it piled on the sausage and the pepperoni. And then it was time now for him to take his pizza and hold it by the crust and begin to eat it. And so whenever he pulled it up and he brought it to his mouth, the weight of the toppings cracked the crust and they went all over him. See, the thing is, when is enough enough? I remember as a kid, my brother and I heard, and he had just gotten his car. He got a car, and this was like a big deal. And we had a cabin we were building, and we read in the newspaper that they had free bricks somewhere. So we drove in the car to get those free bricks. And so we loaded up the trunk with all these free bricks, So we were driving back home, and then we noticed that the back of the car was on the ground. And we had to stop halfway through and unload half the bricks and lose them. See, when is enough enough? There's a bishop by the name of Casey, and he wrote one time, he says, a good way to judge your abundance and how you handle that is look at the size of your keys. Now I know in the modern age that might not be as relevant today because we don't carry as many keys, but do you remember whenever your keys bulged in your pants, and you had so many? He says, look at the keys, and every key is connected to a lock, and every lock is connected to something that you feel that you have to keep guard over and protect because it's of value to you. And he said, the more keys you have, the more worries you have. See, there's something that is pitfallish about abundance. So let's take a look at the scripture today. So it all starts out with apparently 2 brothers are having a fight about inheritance. And so from a distance, Jesus has thrown this question, can't you tell them something about an inheritance? And Jesus says back, no, I'm not touching this one. I'm not going to advocate for this. And so instead, he gives a word or two about possessions, and then he moves into a parable. And so we love parables because parables stretch us in all kinds of different ways. And parables don't have just one interpretation. They count on you to interpret them for yourself and what's going on for you. And so in this parable, you have a rich farm holder who has an abundant crop this year. And then he's marveling at this. And then if you notice, the parable is only 75 words. And then in the parable, whenever he starts to wonder about this, he starts this dialogue with himself with a lot of I's and my's in him. In fact, if you look at those 75 words, 15 of those words are I or my. They're all about himself. So he's having a great conversation about himself, to himself, for himself. So one thing that abundance has a tendency to do is it has a tendency to make us isolate. It has a tendency to kind of like draw us in on ourselves. We don't necessarily see beyond. And that's, of course, what's happening to this particular rich farmer. And so he goes on and says, now, how do I solve my problem with my abundance? And so he says, well, I have my barn, and my barn's just too big. They're too small. So what I'm going to do is take down the barns and build some new ones. Now, in a bizarre kind of way, that makes a little sense to me, whenever you think about it. But then again, does it really? And so he starts to do that, and then he's going to be happy, merry, and free, or whatever those words were, and he's going to be all saved up for the future, and everything's going to be really good. And so then all of a sudden, God appears on the scene and says, you fool, this very night your life will be taken. And then what do you have left? See, you're not even going to have control over this. So the question becomes, what did he do wrong? See, there's a lot of stuff in that parable that I think he did right. Don't you think? He had a successful family business. That's pretty decent. And he worked, apparently. He was a good worker. He wasn't afraid to work. He was a pretty good manager of money, apparently. And he knew how to plant the crops and take care of them. And he knew how to hire the right people, I guess. And he probably was a good financial manager. And how many of you in this room prepare for your future with your investments? That's all smart stuff, it seems to me. Doesn't it seem to you? So what's missing? See, because something's missing. And I think that the answer comes in the obvious. What tends to be missing in this scenario is three things. Number one, this guy forgets about God. Doesn't do any reckoning with God. See, there's a power greater than ourselves that with our riches, our wealth, that we can forget. The second thing is this, is that he started to not see that things like rain constituted his success, or human intelligence that formed seeds constituted success. He was starting to see everything in terms of his own ability. One of my friends, this week I kind of like, he texted me and I texted him back, and he said something about what's the sermon going to be about. So I sent him the gospel and I said, you tell me, And so he wrote back and he said, boy, can I relate to this? Because he said he was successful in his business. And he said that, he would put into his ledger all of his accomplishments, and forget about the accomplishments and the grace of God that precedes all of that, It's real easy for us to do. And then the last kind of point there that this guy didn't do is he forgot something very important. And that's why those end lines, the last four words of that is what? Rich toward God. Is that what it says? Last four. Rich toward God. Okay. He was not rich toward God. Looked at those words and tried to figure out what is the meaning of those words. And it has something to do with this. God is about community. Trinity, there's more than one, And so a lot of interpretations go this. He forgot that with him being blessed, he's to be a blessing. See? And a lot of times with our wealth, we forget that. Or with our riches, or with our goods. See, they're not just for us. We're not blessed just because we're blessable, although we are. But there's more to it, that we are blessed to become blessings for others. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever it comes to money, see, and I don't think this is a sermon that says money is bad. I'm saying that we don't know enough about it. See, because I think we only get taught two things and we don't get taught the third thing. A lot of us get taught how to make money, right? That makes sense. A lot of us get taught how to manage money, like how to invest in those things. But how many of you were ever taught how to deal with the allure of money? I have never been. No one ever taught me about that in terms of what money can do to us. We don't get that particular learning. And that's the downfall, I think, that we have. So, last kind of part then to bring this full circle, how do we handle, first of all, how do we accept abundance? And then how do we handle it? What is the best way for us as sons and daughters of God to do that according to the scripture? Well, I think there's three things. Number one is this. There are some of us in this room here today, and I bet probably more than fewer, some of us that have been born with a hole in our soul. Now, what I mean by that is maybe you didn't get enough of what you needed, and there's this unquenchableness in some of us. It's one of those things that you cannot fill this hole. And so we're not conscious of it necessarily, but our behaviors indicate that. And so what we do is we just don't get satisfaction. So we eat and overeat, but it doesn't fill that hole. Or we drink and overdrink, and it doesn't fill that soul. Or we busy ourselves, workaholism, work and work, or sex and sex, or all kind of different things that feed those holes, and you get no traction anyway because they still empty out right away. Now, what do you do about that? Well, I think the first thing you do about that is recognize it if it's there, name it, and then there's lots of places to get help for those. But you got to start by naming it. So that could be a reason why it's never enough. Second reason is this, is that I call this the closet theory of life. Have you ever noticed that whenever you get a closet to contain things, that it doesn't take too long for you to outgrow your closet? Have you ever noticed that? Now, Larry, my classmate, and I can relate to this, and others of you who were in military schools or seminaries. Whenever we went to the seminary, I got my first closet. It was like 12 inches this way, and it was about 6 feet. And we had a door on it, and we were allowed 6 pairs of socks, 5 underwear, whatever it was, and they had to be beautifully put there. And I'll tell you what, I lived 6 years, no problem. I mean, that was plenty. I had no needs. That was enough. Now, after I left the seminary and had my first apartment, I had 3 closets. Within a very short period of time, I had every one of those closets filled. Now, then I bought a home later, and I had 3 walk-in closets and 2 in the basement. 5. Not enough room, And I learned something about closets. We tend to outgrow our closets. Isn't that true? No matter how much we have, there's always room for it because we fill it. And money is like that too. See, money, sometimes homes are like that. There's this thing that innate to them. They have this way of saying to you, you still need more of me. You still need more of me. And we say to ourselves this little thing, no matter how much you get paid, it's never going to be enough, right? We have that. See, that's the allure. And so there's something to do that we, as sons and daughters of God, need to think about with that so that we don't get ensnared by that. And then the third and final thing is this. I saved this for last. There's a word Jesus uses in there, bless you. There's a word Jesus uses in there that I don't like, and I don't know about you all. The word greed that comes up within the first couple sentences, greed. Not too many people do books on greed that I'm aware of. But there is a guy, a psychologist, who dedicated his career to it. And he has a TED Talk, incidentally, for a 12-minute one, which is kind of good. His name is Peter Piff, Dr. Peter Piff. And his TED Talk is called The Science of Greed. And so here's what he said, what some of the studies are showing from out of the UC Berkeley. That whenever you have privilege, or advantage, privilege or advantage, if you're not careful with it, it will start to build your entitlement. Unconsciously, it will start to do that. So they do this interesting experiment with the game Monopoly. Have any of you ever played Monopoly? Okay, now, they rigged the game, and they've done this with thousands and thousands of pairs. And so 2 people will come in to play Monopoly, and one will be seated here, and one will be seated here. And a roll of a dice determines what seat you get to play in. Okay, and so one person will get to sit there, one here. Now here's the difference. This is regular Monopoly. Okay, so you get the right amount of money, you have the right dice, all that kind of stuff. This is rigged Monopoly, okay, because they get 3 times the money. So whereas this one gets $500, this one has 3 $500 bills. Okay, this one has double dice, so it's not 1 through 6, it's 1 through 12. And every time that they pass go, they get double the amount of money. So it's rigged. Now the players start playing, and what they start to find out is that they say, "This is rigged," and they say, "Yes, it is," but it doesn't change either of the two's positions. See, they don't change it. They don't even ask to change. They continue playing that. But what gets observed in about 20 to 30 minutes is the one that has the rigged to the advantage. Okay. starts to, whenever you roll your die and you get a 9, then you go up the board nine spaces, And you know how you get your rook and you kind of like just pass it through? The one with the advantage starts to hit it harder. So as they move around the board, it's like boom, 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 boom. Another thing that's observed is this. There's this big bowl of pretzels, all right? And the privileged player, the rigged player, he or she tends to eat 80% more of the pretzels than the other. As the game continues to be played, the expressions, that the body language that gets noted on the cameras are things like this. The privileged one will make these triumphant power gestures like, yay, I did it, all those kind of things going on and on. And then there's a change in tone where they move from kindness to rudeness. And then the other thing is they start to exact owes back. You owe me $24. You do this. It's kind of interesting how that all goes. That there's this innateness that as status improves, what tends to happen is compassion and empathy go down. When status improves, self-interest rises and entitlement rises. In fact, some people that get their wealth in whatever way, they begin to feel entitled to things that others don't. See, there's something that comes in on that. Now, I'm not saying beware of those of you who are rich. I'm just saying just be conscious, because there's an innate thing that begins to develop. And that's the thing that the guy wasn't wise about. So, my brothers and sisters, as you think about your abundance, number 1, gratitude. Number 2, it is a blessing. Number 3, don't act like the guy in the parable. Know that there's something alluring about it that takes our thinking. We have to think about it a little bit more than just let it control us. So, may the Lord help us to be wealthy. Amen.